Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us on Twitch today. This is Dark Horse, of course, and we have a very special guest with us today. I'd like to thank Chuck Palahniuk for joining us to talk about Fight Club 3. Hello, Chuck.
Hey, hi, Kara.
So, I think everybody knows who Chuck is, I hope. Of course, the author of the novel Fight Club, which became the movie that everyone loves. And he's done sequels with Dark Horse that are in comics format, Fight Club 2. And this last year, all throughout 2019, we had 12 issues of Fight Club 3 that ran once a month. And they are now collected, available this week in a gorgeous hardcover. It's a big book, very well done. Absolutely beautiful. All kinds of bonus material. All the extra covers done by David Mack, which we'll talk about a bit later. But that's available now in hardcover at comic shops and bookstores. I know that during this quarantine or pandemic, with a lot of stay home orders and various closures, it's not easy for folks to get out, and probably should be staying home. And a lot of comic shops are unfortunately closed, but they're offering online ordering and pickup options. So, what we recommend is that you check comicshoplocator.com or indiebound.org are good websites that can help you find comic shops and bookstores near you if you'd like to support your local comic shops and bookstores. Very much appreciate that. Our books are still available, even though single issues are on hold for a bit. So you can still get our books through all those shops and various online retailers as well. Also, a good thing to note is that Fight Club 3 issue number 1 is actually free right now on Dark Horse Digital. Just go to digital.darkhorse.com and we'll drop some links in the chat as well. But you can check that out and get a little preview if you haven't already read the comics of what you're going to get in this new hardcover. Just a couple more quick announcements before we get down to it. So if you would like to ask some questions yourself of Chuck about Fight Club, ideally, you can put those in the chat and our moderators are watching and they're going to be collecting those so we can get to a Q&A after an initial little talk about the comics. And also, we have 5 copies of Fight Club 3 hardcover to give away today. All you need to do is in the chat, enter it once and only once, the keyword penguin, PENGUIN, and use the hashtag symbol before it, or hashtag or pound. So pound penguin. And that's all you need to do, once and only once, and you'll be entered in the giveaway. So without further ado, Chuck, I thought we might start with a little bit of background information, if you don't mind. What is your background with comics? Did you read them much as a kid?
As a kid, I always read the two extremes of comics. One was the sort of wannabe highbrow classics illustrated. So the first time I read any classical book like Frankenstein or Tale of Two Cities or Ivanhoe, it was classics illustrated. And the second was about as lowbrow as you could be. It was probably EC Comics. It was the horror comics, Tales of the Crypt comics. So it was either really high aspirational comics or it was really low Living Dead comics.
Yeah, we love those EC. We actually publish the EC archives now, so it's really fun to get to revisit all of those Crypt Keeper and other archival EC comics. If you could write for any existing comics property, or even turn a show or movie into a comic and script that, is there anything specific that you would love to write for comics?
I love the old anthology horror comics where it was 3 or 4 short stories in a comic, because they had the perfect blend of a kind of spirituality or religion, because they were always about proof of the afterlife, whether it was somebody coming back from the grave, but it was always about proof of the afterlife. So there was always kind of a religiosity to those kind of horror comics. But there was always a real sort of sexualized nature to them also, people were always coming back from the grave naked or with just tatters of their clothing left. And they were always dead, but they were really well built or voluptuous dead. So nobody was like altogether disgusting dead. They were always kind of sexy dead, sexy naked dead, but they weren't dead. So it kind of promised this kind of carnal delight. At the same time, it promised a life everlasting. It was that perfect combination of spiritual and corporeal.
That makes me think of the way that Richard Corbin tends to draw or illustrate horror comics. Would you choose a particular artist to illustrate those if you were able to do those comics?
Uh, I don't know his name, but Scott Alley has talked about one particular comic, and Scott always says, if I could draw women the way he draws women, I would never leave the house. So that's probably who I would choose.
Well, I guess we should, talk about Fight Club 3 too. So in just a really, really quick Fight Club summary. So in Fight Club 2, Tyler Durden transformed Project Mayhem into Rise or Die. Now in Fight Club 3, we have a new group called Die Off Industries, which has replaced Rise or Die. And they've implemented a plan to fine-tune mankind, leading our narrator, who is now called Balthazar, to forge an unlikely alliance with Tyler Durden. Meanwhile, Marla Singer is about to deliver her second child, and the daddy is Tyler, who is very invested in his heir and the world they'll inherit. So, Chuck, while writing Fight Club 2, did you know that you had more story to tell in an additional sequel, or has this kind of grown over time?
Yeah, I knew the characters did not have any kind of a backstory in Fight Club 1, because I didn't want it to be a Russian novel where we would constantly have to segue to these enormous flashbacks that were just about building character. I wanted a book that was just relentlessly moving forward. And so that didn't include talking about their parents or talking about their upbringing or their childhood. And so in Fight Club 2, it was about establishing the background and the ancestry of the narrator, the male character. And Fight Club 3 is very much, it's worked in there, but it's very much about Marla's backstory, who Marla is as a person. And so I thought, in a way, the whole story really went to Marla in Fight Club 3. She becomes more than just the girl character or the grail object. She becomes really central to the story.
And so you've now written a few different graphic novels, including the coloring books with Dark Horse, Legacy, and Bait. Do you enjoy writing for comics versus writing novels? And does your process differ much between the two mediums?
Boy, writing long prose novels and comics, they both sort of complement one another. That there are things you can get away with in comics in terms of a lot of description and a lot of visual detail, that if you tried to put that into long form prose, it would slow the story so much, and it would confuse the reader so much that you would never get away with that detail. You wouldn't get away with that detail even in film, because you think a film is showing you a lot, but every single shot in film can only include so few details before you would be overwhelmed. And the shots themselves are so short. It's really only in comics that you could give a splash page that will take a reader minutes and minutes and minutes to fully consume. You could never get away with that kind of detail in prose or in film. So, I think comics and prose complement each other.
There are definitely a lot of little Easter eggs throughout the art in Fight Club 3, which we're not going to highlight here because I think people should discover them for themselves, as you said, by studying and just really paying attention as to the art as you're looking at the comics. Also, each issue of the 12-issue series had a variant cover by David Mack, who I'm sure most people are familiar with, an absolutely brilliant comics artist. His covers are mostly watercolor mixed media, but painted. It's actually his variant for issue number 7 that became the cover for this collection too. What sort of input do you usually give David to work from, Chuck? Do you have a process working together on the covers?
As soon as the script is done, I put together a list of all of the cover ideas for the standard covers and for the variants, all the different things that can be referenced within the plot so that the covers relate, to the story itself. And typically David and whatever variant artists work from that list.
Do you have any interesting anecdotes of working with David on covers? I've heard there was a time that he actually bled a little bit onto his canvas.
Oh, that rings a bell, but I can't think of that.
I know he's also mentioned times where I think this happened on an American Gods cover that he did, but there's he accidentally left a coffee cup on the canvas and it made a little coffee stain, and he just worked it into the rest of the painting. Just went with it.
That found object aspect, that collage aspect, is always something fascinating, and that was one of the reasons why we made it a reoccurring device in the Fight Club comics to put real world sort of photorealistic things that appear to lie on the page and obscure either dialogue or expression. And so by using pieces of popcorn or houseflies or rose petals or pills, we make them appear to lay on the page. And if they obscure dialogue, it's to mask dialogue that's really overly clever and negate it. And if they obscure the expression of a character's face, it is to undermine what the character is saying and make it obvious that the character is lying. So David's real world use of objects kind of also mimicked David Fincher, the director's real world use of sort of filmic splices in the Fight Club movie, the splicing of the peanuts into the movie, and also the cutaways where the movie appears to burn in the shutter, and the actors speak to the audience, breaking the fourth wall. So all these devices of putting a kind of fake realism into the narrative are continued by David, and then also continued by Cameron Stewart in as many different ways as we can think of.
It's really interesting to watch it develop throughout the comic. I can't recommend it enough. People should check it out for themselves to really see these devices in action. You'll notice they change. We'll mostly be seeing flies for quite a while, and then it becomes popcorn later on, and it kind of ties into the narrative of the comic. So speaking of the art and all the cover art, there is another cover that a lot of us at Dark Horse especially enjoyed when we saw it. It is, of course, the variant cover for issue number 2 by Cameron Stewart. And this is a romance novel cover, obviously. I know there's got to be a story behind this. What was the inspiration behind this Harlequin romance style cover art?
Can I tell 2 anecdotes?
Sure.
The first one was a million years ago when I worked at the Freightliner truck plant. I worked with a guy who, after work every night, would meet with his girlfriend, and he had a degree in writing, and he and his girlfriend would write Harlequin romances. And they'd been going out for so long that they were no longer really intimate, but their intimate relationship was expressed through writing these romances. And for each Harlequin romance, I think they were paid $3,000. And at the time, that was a lot of money. This would have been in like 1987. So $3,000 for a Harlequin romance. And I ended up at a writers' conference at Princeton University in the 90s. And one morning in the kitchen of this big manor house, I was telling this funny story about the friend of mine who didn't have sex with his girlfriend anymore, but wrote sex with his girlfriend. And I thought it was a great story. And one person in the room, a middle aged woman, got very angry and slammed something down and walked out. But later she came up to me and she said, "So, how is blank?" And she used my friend's name. And I realized that by some huge coincidence, I had traveled all these years and all these miles from coast to coast and actually accidentally met the girlfriend of my friend, the woman with whom he wrote these romance novels. And the coincidence of that was just overwhelming. Uh, but later at Freightliner, when I had more of an office job, we had an intercompany email. It was just between employees. And a friend of mine asked me if I would write an ongoing erotic series for her, starring her. And she brought me an international male men's underwear catalog, which is basically the men's version of the Victoria's Secret catalog. And, uh, and so I wrote this ongoing series about this fashion photographer who just photographed men in their underwear and speedos and bikinis, and she was just fantastically cruel and brutal to them and manipulated them and bullied them. And I sent this to her almost every day, and I did not realize, but she was forwarding it on a mailing list of several hundred women. So my first readership was this erotic series about a fashion photographer bullying male models that was being read by something like 800 different women at their desks every morning. Um, and that's before I ever wrote a word of fiction.
Has that ever been collected, or would you collect it?
I don't think it was ever even printed. It was gone the next day.
Uh, well, so another interesting relationship, I hope you can tell us a little bit more about the Fight Club 3 collection. A really great thing about this new hardcover is that it features an introduction by train spotting author Irvine Welsh. Can you tell us a little bit about your friendship with him and how that came to be?
A million years ago, before I'd ever published anything, my editor, or the man who would eventually become my editor at Random House, sent me a copy of Welsh's first novel, The Marabou Stork Nightmares. And, and he said, read this book. There's something called laddie culture just emerging in England right now. It's kind of characterized by laddie magazines, the most famous of which was Maxim. And so this kind of boys club culture was was in literature a great deal, and Irving Welsh kind of was the standard bearer, whether or not he chose to be. And so my editor really wanted me to read Irving Welsh, and it was only years later that we met. He came through Portland on a tour, and I went. I took all of my books, and he signed them, and we spoke, and we've been friends ever since. But yeah, I asked him this fall if he would write the introduction, and he was happy to do it, and I was thrilled. Um, but yeah, he and I have been friends for, boy, 30 years, almost 30 years.
Wow. It's a really good introduction too. It's a bit long. I don't want to, try to read the whole thing right now, but there's a little bit of it that stood out to me. He says, I've been privileged to join Chuck in events down the years, and I simply don't know any other novelist who works as relentlessly hard as he does to connect with his audience. And in my experience, this is very true. You always turn your signings into experiences for your fans to remember. There's always an interesting like photo op that you can do. There's been the most recent book signing you did with us at Powell's included beauty pageant photos and props. Of course, there's the classic. I'm sure a lot of people have seen the photos of you doing little Fight Club fighting poses with people. Where do you get your ideas for these? Are you inspired by the book itself, or do you kind of reach outside for other ideas or props to make these truly like experiences that are memorable for your fans?
The first, one of the biggest factors was the first Comic-Con I ever did. I was placed next to Carrie Fisher, and I had a chance to talk to her because I noticed how she met with her readers, and she was very hands-on. And she said, that is what people will remember. If you touch them significantly, they won't remember what they said because they never know what to say. And they won't remember what you say because they're too excited. So, but what they will remember is being touched. So if you can touch their neck or touch their face, or if you can embrace them, they will remember the physical sensation of that moment where your physical reality and their physical reality came into contact. And so I thought that was really bright and really brilliant. Nowadays, really risky. I just came back from a huge tour, which included a lot of New York at the end of February. I am so glad that I'm not sick.
Yeah.
But the other aspect is I always want to have a prop or a kind of something to suggest a narrative. And for one tour, for example, I brought this enormous trophy. I had this custom made by a trophy shop. They made a trophy that would stand over 6 feet tall, but it would break down and fit in my suitcase in all these pieces. So before every event, before every public meeting, I would have to put it together in my hotel room. And then I would have to try to find a taxi cab big enough to accommodate this huge trophy. Because as I gave the trophy to someone in a photograph, it would look forevermore like they had won this enormous honor. And forevermore, as people saw that photo, they would say, oh my gosh, what did you win? What is this about? So a trophy or anything that can suggest a larger narrative that the reader has to invent. You know, they can say, yeah, I met Chuck, he brought this trophy, but they have the opportunity of making up this big lie. Because after every event, me and a friend would always take that trophy out to bars. And if you want to be the center of attention in a bar, take a giant trophy and just set it next to your table. And every woman in the bar will come over and say, oh my gosh, what did you win? And it's such a passive aggressive way of drawing the entire focus. Or even just walking down the street with a giant trophy, people will approach you because it's a badging device. It's a permission for people to approach you and say, what did you win? What are you so good at? So the photo should create a narrative, and ideally it should also have a kind of physical contact, a proximity, so that we do that Carrie Fisher moment where I'm real to them and they're real to me. And that's how it's slowly evolving.
It makes it really fun. I know I enjoyed trying to think of a little narrative to go along with photos from your past signings. So I think it works. For Fight Club 2, we had fake severed arms with your signature across them as giveaway items. Was your home just full of those severed arms for a while? Did you have a whole bunch in storage?
We had a warehouse full of those arms. I went through a wholesaler and I got, over the years, hundreds, tens and tens of thousands of those arms. And over the years, they were arms, legs, feet, hands. Because at the end of a typical event, I would throw as many as 500 of those into the audience. And it was a chance, it was a wonderful shtick to bring the bookseller up on stage and then sort of taunt the audience and say, has the internet ever given you candy, or has the internet ever done this or that? Well, these booksellers have, and these booksellers have put this event together. And I want you to give them a really big hand. And if you give them a big enough hand, we have a big surprise for you. And the poor booksellers would have to stand there and just be cheered and cheered and cheered. And then from backstage, I would drag out these enormous cases of arms and then dump them out in a mountain on the stage. And people would just gasp because there would be hundreds and hundreds. And then the booksellers had to throw them into the auditorium. So the booksellers had that wonderful cathartic task of throwing these hundreds of arms out to these people who are screaming for them. And it just made a great big finish for so many tours.
Speaking as a longtime bookseller myself, that's both terrifying and also very gratifying. And of course, with most shops are being closed right now and people staying home, this has affected your planned signing tour to support Fight Club 3, unfortunately. Can you tell us a little bit about any alternative events you have planned, any upcoming digital signings or things like that?
Now, we have got a live signing. I've never done an event like this, but at the end of the month, live signing is going to stage an event where I will be signing books and answering, interacting. We're going to see how that goes. I've also contacted all the bookstores that were going to be on that tour. King's English in Salt Lake City, Tattered Cover in Denver, Changing Hands in Phoenix, Book People in Austin, Rainy Day Books in Kansas City, Prairie Lights in Iowa City, Left Bank in St. Louis, Carmichael's Bookstore in Louisville, Fountain Bookstore in Oxford. Finally, Oxford, Mississippi, I was going to come and see you. Not going to happen. Anderson Booksellers in Naperville outside of Chicago. All of these bookstores, I'm going to be working with them to put together a whole collage of stuff that I will be making, signing, writing, doing, and then making sure that those go into the books for those stores. So if you want really signed, really personalized, really messed up books in a kind of David Mack collage style, it's all stuff that I am now sourcing and signing and scribbling on. And it is stuff that will be in those books for those bookstores. So if any of those bookstores ring a bell, go there. Right now, I Like Comics in Vancouver has those books. So if you want to see what one of the books looks like, check out I Like Comics in Vancouver, Washington.
That was a long list and very well remembered.
All the cities that don't get book events, I was going to do them all.
Those are a lot of great bookstores too. I know at least a good number of the ones you mentioned. But yeah, as I said, you can, folks at home, you can check out sites like indiebound.org, which will kind of point you to more of those bookstores and their websites. And comicshoplocator.com is another tool that helps you find comic shops specifically in North America as well as outside of North America. So those are good tools to help you find their contact information as well as going direct to all their websites.
A lot of these stores, I work with about 50 independent bookstores, and at least 50 independent comic stores. So a lot of these stores know how to reach me. And so you might go to your local independent, and they very likely have my email, and they can get a hold of me, and we can make something happen for you. So get a hold of your independent comic store or bookstore, and chances are we already have a relationship and we can do a book for you.
See, you really are the most accessible, dedicated to your fans creator that I think we work with. Um, Speaking of which, we do have now a fan Q&A, which we will do with your questions from the chat. So if you have not already submitted questions about Fight Club or just questions for Chuck about his writing, you're welcome to do so. We have until about 1 p.m., so we can take a few questions, and we have some good ones to start with. So somebody actually asked, Chuck, what is your favorite Fight Club comic cover and why?
It's my favorite because I thought it was the ballsiest, but it was a variant done for, I believe, Chicago Comics. Years ago, I was in Germany. Where did the Beatles start in Germany? Why can't I think of this? Anyway, grungy northern German city. And my publisher took me to dinner. And at one point we passed this enormous plywood barricade. And I asked what it was. And the publisher explained that it was actually two barricades that were parallel. They run parallel to block this one street. And they have these spring-loaded doors in them. And the doors are offset. So as you enter through one door, you have to walk over to enter through the other door. And they block off the red light district. And there are all these women who stand outside this barrier because their boyfriends or their husbands have asked if they can, by themselves, go through and just look around. And there's this fantastic German word for the women who are standing outside the barrier waiting for their male counterpart to come back. And it translates to women who wait in shame for their men, because they themselves, the women, can't go in. Because if a woman goes into this district and she is not a sex worker, then the children of the sex workers, they fill condoms with urine. They urinate in rubbers, they tie them up, they set them in a sunny location so they really get foul. And then if a woman comes in who's not a sex worker, the children will chase her down and pelt her with these urine balloons. And that's why women don't go in there.
Fair enough.
And the variant cover actually depicted a child holding a urine-filled condom. And I thought that was so gutsy. No comic has ever had an image like that on its cover. So that's why it's got to be my favorite.
Good answer. We have some really good questions from the fans in chat. So we already kind of covered this one, different process for comics versus novels. Are you considering writing sequels to any of your?
I just got the city, the German city, Hamburg. It's Hamburg.
Hamburg.
So Hamburg has the.
It was just too easy. Are you considering writing sequels to any of your other works or writing any more comics in general?
You know, the only new comic is there's been really slow progress on a series that I was writing for a big name premium cable channel streaming company. The progress has been so slow that I've been talking to people about just turning it into a comic, doing it as a comic, just to move into the fun part. And so I can't really talk about it, but that might still happen. As far as a sequel, there's a big reveal at the end of Fight Club 3 that shows how I'm beginning to tie a lot of the Chuck universe together in the way that Stephen King has been able to tie his sort of Maine universe together, the state of Maine. So Fight Club 3 sort of ends with this union of two very dissimilar Chuck stories.
It also ends with something that happens to a character that I also love. Someone has asked, will Chloe ever receive her own spin-off series?
Chloe has become the female equivalent of Tyler Durden in Fight Club 3. She really has become the kind of mentoring character for Marla that is so bold that she makes Marla look timid. So Chloe has really come into her own, and she has maybe the best ending of any character ever.
Yes. No spoilers. You need to read and find out. Another question, does the quarantine help or hinder your writing?
It is terrible. You know, I find myself doing all these other things instead of writing. I'm not sure why. Maybe I'm just so used to being alone because everybody else had to go off to their work. And so it was okay for me to do my work. But because so many people, aren't being forced out of the household to go to work, I'm also kind of taking a vacation. So I'm signing a lot of books, I'm answering a lot of letters, but I'm just not writing very much.
Yeah, it is somewhat different, I think, for people who normally work from home. I know I've heard from a few people that, they're used to being home alone working, and now suddenly like their partner or whoever is home with them, and it's strange and it ruins their solitude.
And there's people in the streets, and everything is blooming. It's like a Vincent Minnelli movie outside, and it's so distracting.
Well, another interesting question. If Chuck hadn't become an author, what would your ideal profession have been?
I really like problem solving, and I would have liked to have been an architect or a doctor, but I just don't think I have the head for that kind of science. But otherwise, I'm a really good mason. I'm really good and really passionate about doing stonework. And there's this sort of three-dimensional problem solving of combining different masses so that once they're together, they amount to something totally different than the sum of their parts. And so that aspect of the quarantine has been fine for me because the gyms are closed, but I can still go outside and I can still get two dump trucks full of stone delivered and spend my days stacking and sorting and doing rock work. So this is hashtag best suntan ever year for me.
I love that. Not maybe what they would have expected, but I hope that answers your question, Stuart, it looks like. One more question, I think, before we wrap it up, and also just for the folks watching at home, we have had 4 winners drawn in the giveaway to win a copy of Fight Club 3. So there's 1 copy remaining. You just need to enter hashtag or # penguin PENGUIN with the hashtag, and that will enter you in the drawing once and only once. So one copy left. And our final question, unless we get any more from chat, is there is a repeating appearance of the color cornflower blue in your stories. Does that have significance?
It does. And really early on, I had thought in every book, I'm going to mention cornflower blue. I'm going to mention Missoula, Montana, and I'm going to mention the name Gwen because they were all very personal to me. And I've more or less stopped all three, but it's sweet in that in fan fiction and all these kind of spin-off things, other people have kind of picked up the torch and they're now referencing these things that I've no longer referenced. So I appreciate that. I did want to not get out of here before mentioning those stores again that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, please.
So, if you're looking for something more personalized, this is not a cheap book. This is the most expensive book I have ever brought to market. And I would like to do as much as possible to make this book something special for you, even long distance. So I like comics in Vancouver, Tattered Cover in Denver, King's English in Salt Lake City, Changing Hands in Phoenix, Book People in Austin, Texas, Rainy Day Books in Kansas City, Prairie Lights in Iowa City, Left Bank Books in St. Louis, Carmichael's Books in Louisville, Fountain Books in Oxford, Mississippi, and Anderson Booksellers in Naperville. Whether it is Elliott Bay or Book Soup or Garden District Books in New Orleans, say hi to Britain for me. I know these booksellers, they know me. Don't be afraid to ask them to contact me for something special. They got a lot of time on their hands right now, and so do I. So let's make the best of it.
Absolutely. And it's a beautiful book. Like I said, quite large, all 12 issues collected in one hardcover volume. All of the covers, the variant covers, David Mack's beautiful work interspersed as little chapter dividers, and also back matter. And it's a beautiful, sturdy hardcover. I don't know if you prefer hardcovers or paperbacks, but personally, I do really like hardcovers. So for the collector, this is a great book. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up. We will draw one more winner for one copy of this, which will send you a private message about. If you have won, you should get an alert in the chat. And also, if you don't DM us or whisper us, we will do that for you. So look for that if you have been drawn as a winner. And thank you so much, Chuck, for taking the time to join us today. I know it's a little weird having to be on Zoom calls all the time. But I think we really appreciate it. Fight Club 3 is a big release for us. So thanks for talking with Dark Horse, and especially for chatting with fans, since we can't do in-person events right now.
Also, the virtual Comic-Con, Mainframe Comic-Con at the end of this month, April 25th, 26th, David Mack and I will be doing a virtual panel. And so that's Mainframe Comic-Con, the weekend of the 25th and the 26th. So check that out.
Yeah, that sounds like a really exciting event that's coming together right now. So Dark Horse, we'll try to share more about that and your appearance there. As soon as we get some more details, we'll put that on our social media as well. Well, thank you again, and we will sign off from the live stream for today. And this will be available later on our Twitch channel as a video on demand, so you can watch the full stream. We will also upload it to our YouTube, and we'll share links to where that's available afterwards. Final giveaway drawing happening in a moment. And remember that you can find issue number 1 of Fight Club 3 for free if you just want to get a little sample on Dark Horse Digital right now. That's digital.darkhorse.com. We have lots of free comics and other items for you while we're all staying home, so that you don't have to leave your house to read comics. So Fight Club 3 available in stores this week. Please check with your local indie comic shops and bookstores if you possibly can. We have links in the chat for sites that will help you find those. And thank you again very much, Chuck, for joining us today.
Cara, thank you.